Okay, we're good. We're on. We're live. All right. Well, good evening and welcome to NMI Guatemala edition. And it just so happened that that Guatemala was the subject of the last NMI Central newsletter, and so I'm going to be sharing some information from that, of course, and we know a little bit about Guatemala. Um, so we're going to be sharing some things about Guatemala itself, about what the church is doing in Guatemala, and so forth. But first of all, let's open in a word of prayer. Lord, we just thank you for the privilege of coming together in your name and to praise you for the work that you're doing in other countries. We know that not everybody has the privilege of serving overseas, and we long to support those that are doing your work overseas. And we just ask your blessings tonight as we share a little bit about what's happening in the country of Guatemala and what your body of believers are doing there as well. And we ask you to be with us tonight and be with those who couldn't be here tonight for traveling or health reasons or other reasons, Lord. We ask all of this in your name. Amen. All right. Well, and by the way, as we're going through this, if you want to ask a question about something, clarification, whatever, feel free to ask questions. This Guatemala is called the Land of Eternal Spring. I'm hoping that you'll be able to read some of what I have up there, but there's a lot of pictures, so I can speak to the pictures. Land of Eternal Spring. Guatemala is called the Land of Eternal Spring because the temperature of Guatemala is about 75 to 76 degrees all year round. It does get a little cooler in the wintertime and a little warmer, and depending where you are in Guatemala, the higher elevations are cooler, obviously. If you're down near the beach, that's going to be warmer. But everything grows there. I mean, just anything. You just spit a seed out of your mouth and it'll grow a tree, you know. Everything grows there because there's a lot of igneous type of soil, right, or volcanic soil, which is very good for growing things. Guatemala has 33 volcanoes. 26 of those volcanoes are active. Now, active means that they have erupted in recent memory, or in human memory, in human recording. But there are some that are constantly going, and you can see them from the city. If you look around the city, there's generally 3 volcanoes that you can see from the city. There's Volcán de Agua, which is the water volcano that's near the old capital of Guatemala. There's Pacaya, and there's Volcán de Fuego, which is the fire volcano. And so there's those are more active. Not the water volcano, but the other 2 are more active. So one of the biggest symbols and most, I guess, famous symbols of Guatemala is the Mayan ruins in Tikal. Oh, I'm sorry, Ted. Let me... You know what? I'm going to point to you when I want to change it. How about that? Okay. So what we're looking at here is a ancient Mayan temple. Okay, this is one of the things Guatemala is absolutely famous for. And if you ever get a chance to go to Guatemala, it's worth the trip to go to Tikal and see what the Mayans were up to a couple of thousand years ago. This is a pyramid called Jaguar, or the Jaguar, the Temple of the Jaguar. And it's on a lot of Guatemala symbology. It's on the currency. I forgot to bring the money. Oh well. But anyway, this is most of the pictures you'll see here. Most of the pictures are pictures that I took when I was in Guatemala and various trips to Guatemala. That's my uncle sitting right down here, standing next to the temple. We took him to Guatemala a few years ago, and he really enjoyed it. All right. Okay, so this is what we're going to talk about with respect to Guatemala. Where it's located, a little bit about its geography. I've talked a little bit about it. The people, Guatemala, the important part of Guatemala, the religions, okay, the religion makeup of Guatemala, what the Nazarene Church is doing in Guatemala, and some prayer needs that they have in Guatemala. Okay, so first question is, where is it? Now, before I first went to Guatemala, which is 1988, I was invited to go there, but I didn't know where it was. Okay, I had no idea where it was. I thought it was maybe in Asia somewhere. It's not, okay? If you recognize this country right here, this is Mexico, right? So we have Mexico here. This is the Yucatan Peninsula. That little sliver right there is Belize. Then you have El Salvador down here, that little one. Then you have Honduras, Nicaragua, Costa Rica, and Panama. Everybody's familiar with the Panama Canal. And that comprises Central America right there. Now, it used to be that a lot of this region, like from southern Mexico down here, that used to be all Guatemala. It all used to be Guatemala. Okay? And I haven't said it in English so many years. 1821, okay, the year 1821, September 15th, is when Guatemala, that region, gained its independence from Spain. Okay, so we just celebrated the 4th. They would celebrate, their Independence Day is the 15th of September, 1821. And so all of these countries, Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, Belize, they all celebrate the same Independence Day because they all used to be together. And as a matter of fact, the flag, if you look at Honduras's flag, it has 5 stars in it, and those are the 5 countries that used to comprise Guatemala. But that is Guatemala, how it sits in Central America. Now, when I was in Guatemala, I saw a lot of maps that included Belize as part of Guatemala. That's still a point of contention for many people. A lot of the Guatemalans still consider Belize as part of Guatemala, but the UN recognizes it as its own country, Belize. And really, it's a very different type of country. I've been to Belize, and they speak kind of a pig English. And the southern or the border with Guatemala has a lot of Mayans, but it's pretty different. But so we're just going to concentrate on Guatemala. And if you want to know how big it is, I always think of it as about the same size as Ohio or Pennsylvania as far as area. It's about 44,000 square miles. And you can see here, this is Pennsylvania up here, and this is Guatemala. You can see it overlaid on top of that area, Pennsylvania, Maryland, Virginia. So you can kind of see how big Guatemala is. It's not a huge country, but it's pretty significant in that region, and it's significant in the church as well. So here's some of the major cities. Flores, this is where a lot of the ancient Mayan ruins are, you know, from the northern part of Guatemala into Belize. The Mayan Empire was really kind of up here. Coban is this area right here, northern Guatemala. It's more sparsely populated than like Guatemala City and these cities down here. I would say probably 60 or 70% of the population lives in the lower half of Guatemala. So up here, it's a lot more sparsely populated. It's interesting. You see a bunch of cities that end with Ango, Huehuetenango, Quetzaltenango, Matzaltenango, Chichicastenango, Chimaltenango. There's a lot of Angos. Ango means the place of. Okay, so Quetzaltenango means the place of the Quetzal, and the Quetzal is the national bird of Guatemala. You see it in the flag. I think we have probably, oh yeah, we have somewhat of a likeness. Okay, this is the bird, long tail, kind of a red chest. All right. Quetzal is also not only the national bird, but it's also the currency. You know what? I think I might have some currency, actually. I kind of stowed away as an emergency. Let me see. Hold on a second. Sometimes I carry some extra when we go to Guatemala. Exchange rate is about 7.6 to 8 quetzales for $1. So what do I have here? Ooh, I have some big money. 100 quetzales. So, you know what? I'll pass some of these around. So each one of these are worth about what, 12 and a half bucks. So I do want them back. But you can look at them. About 12 and a half dollars. Yeah. So in there you can see the quetzal. You can see some of the other symbols of Guatemala. You see the pyramid behind whatever president that is. You see the quetzal right there and some Mayan symbology. Yeah. And of course you have the watermark like we have in the States as well. So that's kind of the the makeup of the Guatemala geographically. Judy's family comes from, well, what was your dad from? Escuintla? No. Progreso. Progreso, yeah. El Progreso. I don't know. I don't think that's here. Escuintla is right here. So you have part of Guatemala is touching the Gulf of Mexico up here, and then there's a kind of a long coast on the Pacific Ocean. So they have a border, I guess, or a beach side on each side. Puerto Barrios, that's actually where the first missionaries got there. I'll talk about that a little bit later. This is the Izabal. It's a kind of a large lake there. There's a river that goes down here called Rio Dulce, which means freshwater river. Yeah, so just so that's Guatemala and how it's situated, and let's go to the next one. Okay, so who are the people in Guatemala? Well, there's two basic types of people, and let me give you some stats here. Oh, by the way, the population of Guatemala is 17.7 million. Okay, that's less than what we have here in Florida. Here in Florida, we have, I think we passed 20 million here in Florida. But they have 17.7 million. You know about the size. So the different types of people in Guatemala, we have one type, it's called mestizo or ladino, and these are the people that are kind of a mix of the Spaniards when they came and the Mayan Indians. Okay, so they're more fair complexion. This guy right here on the left, that's Alejandro Giammattei, which is the current president of Guatemala. And then over here is one of probably the most famous singer, right, that came out of Guatemala. His name is Ricardo Arjona. And you can see, so these guys, the complexion of these guys are just kind of like us, maybe a little bit darker, maybe like Ted. Okay, there's me, there's Judy, and then you split the difference, and it's basically Ted. Okay. So that's like how much of the population? That is about 56%, according to the CIA fact book, which is really good on Guatemala. 56% are these kind of people, and then we have these. Okay, this is typically what we see as Guatemalans, and these are the descendants of the Maya Indians. About 42% of the population of Guatemala looks like this. Okay, and that's kind of, it's interesting because they haven't become as homogeneous as us. You know, we're a melting pot, United States, right? But even some of the countries around Guatemala are more mixed and homogeneous. Guatemala is a little bit special in that way, and that they still have preserved, the Mayans kind of, marry Mayans, and they kind of preserve that culture. And there's some other things that Guatemala does to preserve that I'll talk about later. But one of the things that the Spaniards did when they came to Guatemala and they conquered Guatemala is they assigned a color code to the different regions. Okay, so you notice these two ladies over here on this on the right-hand side. It's kind of a, maybe we can turn those lights down a little bit so you can see the colors. They're really beautiful. But these are a lot of the blue and blacks and different shades of blue, and then and these have some different colors. So it was like a code for the Spaniards. So if they found, you know, a native Guatemalan somewhere and they were wearing a certain code, they would know, hey, you're from Solola, you're from Coban, you're from Chichicastenango, whatever. But even today, they keep those color codes because they identify with the region that they come from. So it's very interesting. It's almost like a uniform, but they do so much with those colors. It's just incredible. Probably the best textile makers in the world. I mean, they really do a great job, and it's very nice to go there and see how they do it. That's part of the attraction of Guatemala, is that they still do things by hand. They still make the dyes from things like plants and bugs and things like that, things that, you know, still work for dyes. Thank you very much, Deb. Appreciate that. Okay, so we have 56% Ladino or Mestizo, and then 42% Maya, and then according to their stats, it's, you know, 2% other, and that's probably gringos like me that are staying in Guatemala and taking advantage of it. So what's so special about Guatemala? Well, one of the nice things about Guatemala is that you have the city, Guatemala City, which is a modern city. You know, before I went there, I was thinking, okay, these people live in huts, or maybe they live in trees because it's a jungle. No, they have roads, they have electricity, they have movies, and it's becoming more and more westernized, more and more, you know, especially as more Guatemalans leave Guatemala, come to the United States, work, and then send their money back to Guatemala. That makes a big difference. In El Salvador, it's the number one income from El Salvador is called remittances. That's Salvadorans that come to the United States, work, and send money back to El Salvador. That's their, believe it or not, that's their number one income. Guatemala, their number one income, or their number one industry, is tourism. Tourism is very important. So you have people that come to Guatemala, you know, you fly into the city if you want, and then within a few minutes or a couple hours, you're in, you know, very beautiful nature, natural settings here. And again, I took these pictures. This didn't come from a magazine. You know, this is actually some steps in Tikal, you know, going through the woods there. This is a waterfall that's near a very beautiful lake. I think I have a picture of it, called Lake Atitlan. According to some tourist or one of those magazines that rate such things, it's the third most beautiful lake in the world. Okay, and it is something to behold when you're driving down into it. It's in the middle of 3 volcanoes. It's just a gorgeous, gorgeous place. So the nature is you know, they do a good job of preserving the nature. They have laws against you know, destruction of nature. Even when you're talking about Tikal, okay, Tikal, the ancient Mayan city, most of Tikal is still buried under the jungle. Okay, we see a lot of temples. I mean, they've uncovered a lot, but it's only about 10% of what's there. It's very slow going because what they have to do, if they, you know, they find one of these mounds that have a temple under it, what they need to do is apply for permits, and they have to go through this whole environmental protection process, and they can't just like rip the trees down or rip the vines off of it. They have to inject it with a certain type of chemical which makes the plants retreat, and then they take each brick of these temples and they measure it and weigh it, clean it, and then put it back. Okay, that's why it takes so much time to uncover and excavate, a lot of these temples in Guatemala, because, like I said, everything grows there, right? So, I mean, you leave a bunch of temples alone for a couple of centuries, the jungle takes it back, just takes it right over. Everything grows. So, but there's still so many places there that are absolutely gorgeous. All right, what else? So people come there for nature. Some of them come to do hiking and things like that. Some people come for the historic sites. So on the left-hand side is a picture I took in Antigua, Guatemala. Antigua, Guatemala is the old capital. It's the former capital of Guatemala, and it was mostly destroyed by an earthquake in 1776. Kind of an interesting year. But it was destroyed, and so they moved the capital to its current location in Guatemala City. But Antigua still has a lot of the old churches that weren't destroyed. It has a lot of the old ruins, the old kind of classical European architecture, and it's really, really nice. Very popular place to go. In fact, Antigua, Guatemala is one of the places that people go to learn Spanish. Okay? It's very famous for its Spanish schools because it's an immersion program where you live with a family and you speak Spanish all the time, right? You want to eat, you got to speak Spanish. But it's very famous schools there, and the Guatemalan Spanish is more. Well, I mean, I've heard a lot of different types of Spanish, and I think the reason why these schools are so popular is because the Spanish that is spoken by Guatemalans is among the most clear Spanish. Like, you don't want to learn Spanish, I hate to say it, from like one of the islands, like Puerto Rico or Dominican Republic or Cuba. Don't want to learn Spanish from them, okay? That's like trying to listen to somebody talk with marbles in their mouth. Guatemalan Spanish is very clear, okay? They have very clear enunciation, and the grammar is easy to follow. So that's why people come from all over the world to learn Spanish there. That's where I learned Spanish. And again, you have Tikal there on the right-hand side. People come to see these sites, to enjoy them, to study them. Some of them volunteer to be, to help excavate and restore and that sort of thing. All right, what else? These are two kind of actually it's the same area of tourism here. This is San Miguel or San Tomas. Can't remember. What's that? San Juan? Ah, okay. This is one of the towns that is around that lake that I mentioned, the one that has the 3 volcanoes, the beautiful one. So you can see it's a gorgeous lake. You can kind of see some of the lake here in the background as you're walking down. It's kind of a steep walk down. There's markets and people selling things along the side. Gorgeous colors everywhere. It's interesting. When I put this photo in here, because I took this photo, I didn't realize that this indigenous lady here was there, checking her email on her cell phone. That's not something you saw like, a couple of 100 years ago. She looks exactly like people from 200 or 300 years ago, but without the cell phone. I thought that was really interesting. When we went back, Judy and I, we were married in 1990. We got married in Guatemala, and then we got married again in where I went to school in Melbourne, Florida. But when we first went back to Guatemala, and we went to another town that's on this lake, just to let you know what it was like back then. This was what, 91 or 92? I think Ted was a baby. We took Ted with us. You walk down the streets, and the big draw, okay, the big advertising thing for a hotel was a sign that says "Hay teléfono." In other words, we have a telephone. Okay, that was the big draw. We have a telephone. Oh wow. Okay, we can stay at this hotel because then we can call back, and check in, or maybe there's an emergency. That was the big thing. Today, everybody's got smartphones. Everybody. I the indigenous folks that are riding the buses with their chickens, they all have smartphones, all of them. Yeah, that's kind of sad, you know. In a way, it's kind of sad, um, but this is but there are so many places like this. Some of them are more kind of built up for tourists than others, but there's still a lot of places that you can go that you can enjoy some of that culture. Yeah, I mean, it used to be. It went from like telefono, right, to internet cafes, and we used to have those here too, right? You know, you couldn't afford to have internet in your house, so you go to this place that they have internet and use theirs. And they used to have that. I don't even know if they have internet cafes anymore. I mean, cell service is so prevalent there, and it really blossomed even quicker than it did here because copper is so expensive. And if you can imagine running copper lines for telephone over all those volcanoes, that can get pretty expensive. But if you stick a cell tower on on a volcano, hey, it's in a high spot, has good coverage, you know. So it really flourished and grew very, very quickly in Guatemala, the cell service. And then what followed that was LTE and data for the internet. Okay, let's see. Oh, what I wanted to mention about Guatemala and tourism. Something special that Guatemala did that no other country has done, at least in that region of the world, is they made one of the Mayan dialects a national language, an official language. The official language of Guatemala is Spanish and Quiche. So there's a lot of different Mayan dialects. There's Quiche, there's Quechí, there's Cachiquel, there's Mam. So there's a lot of different Mayan dialects. They picked one of the prevalent ones and said, we're going to make this a national language too. And what that did is it allowed the government to put funds into making signs in that language, making school books in that language. A friend of mine got me a Quiche Bible, which was kind of cool. You know, have that in the ancient Mayan language, a Bible published. But what it did was, by recognizing and preserving that language, and really all the languages are still spoken, but what it did is it helped preserve the culture. They didn't do that in El Salvador. So if you ever go to El Salvador or Honduras, you're not going to find many, if any, indigenous people wearing their, colorful clothes. You're not going to find those. These are more made for Americans, but the colors and the way they dress and everything, they've lost it in most of these other countries. But Guatemala, they preserved it. They preserved it through the language, and that's a real priority for them, because, like I said, tourism is their #1 industry. They really rely on people coming and spending money, buying things like this and things like that. All right, but that's what makes Guatemalan special. Guatemalan's special in a lot of ways, but those are some ways. All right, let's talk about the religion. Now, when I lived in Guatemala in the late 80s, Catholicism just dominated everything. Just absolutely dominated everywhere. Judy grew up Catholic. Her family is mostly Catholic. Probably more than 80% Catholic when I lived there. Today, Roman Catholics comprise 41.7% of the population. Evangelical, 38.8%. I mean, that's almost a rounding error difference, and that's just been like 30 years. So, interesting thing about, if you speak to some people in Guatemala, some Catholics, okay, they'll ask you, are you Catholic or are you Christian? And my answer, well, I'm Christian, but so is a Catholic. We're all supposed to be part of the same team, right? We're all part of, the Christ team. But they don't see it that way. They call evangelicals, they call them Christian, and they call themselves Catholic. It's more of a cultural thing. but now it's what they're calling evangelicals or Christians. It's becoming a lot more prominent in Guatemala, to the point, well, of course, I took one of their family members and brought her into the Nazarene church. We both entered the Nazarene church together right after we were married. But we have some other members of our family that are also evangelical as well. So it's making headway, and according to the CIA statistics, it's almost neck and neck now, which is fantastic. I mean, it's great to have Trinitarians, anyway, but the evangelicals are really making a lot of headway there. All right. Oh, and by the way, I can't zoom up here, but you may recognize that symbol, the Nazarene church symbol, Iglesia del Nazareno, and then it should say Templo Evangelico, okay, up here, Templo Evangelico. Maybe, Ted, you have a better view. Is that what it says? Yeah, okay, Templo Evangelico. It's a evangelical temple or evangelical church. All right, so let's talk about the Nazarenes, what they're doing. So we have in November 10th, 1904, is the first work of the Nazarene and the Church of the Nazarene in Guatemala. Now, if you think, I had to look this up because I couldn't remember. You remember when the Pentecostal Church of the Nazarene merged with I think it was the Church of, it's not the Church of Christ, it was, the Holiness Church of Christ. Holiness Church of Christ merged with the Pentecostal Church of the Nazarene. What year was that? 1908, yeah. October 13th, 1908. So this actually predates our current structure in the Nazarene, in the Church of the Nazarene. So they attribute it to what the Nazarene Church was prior to that date. But I thought that was really interesting that they've been there for a long time, a very long time. So you have in 1905. So in 1904, Richard Anderson and his wife Ana Maud, they arrived in Puerto Barrios. That's the place to the northeast that I pointed out. That's right on the Gulf of Mexico, okay, or the Caribbean Sea. So they landed there. They did some work there, and then they moved to Coban the following year, in a place called Alta Verapaz. And then in 1919, a missionary, John Franklin, he organized the first actual church, Nazarene church, in Coban. They just celebrated their 100th anniversary a couple of years ago. That's pretty amazing, isn't it? 100 years, 100-year Nazarene church. And there's a little nice tidbit. The first ever alabaster building was built in 1949 in Guatemala. So that's something special as far as the Nazarene church, because we give to alabaster all the time. So let's go to the next one. Just a few years ago, I mean, we've been traveling back and forth to Guatemala for many, many years. But just a couple of years ago, I think it was 2019, we decided to seek out what we had heard about, which was the Theological Seminary, Nazarene Theological Seminary in Guatemala. And this is it. This is the entrance here on the left, over here, and this is inside. And it's just a gorgeous campus. I was very surprised because looking at it from the street, it doesn't look like much, but you go inside and there's like acres of, rolling hills and, buildings. And I forgot how many rooms they said, but it was more than 200 rooms that they had there. That it's also used as a conference center for other churches, other Christian churches. In fact, I think let me see, did I write down the name? Yeah, Centro Cristiano de Convenciones. So that's the center of, it's a conference center for Christians, basically. And also part of this campus, they have a huge, looks like a hangar. It's like a warehouse where they build pieces of buildings. They prefabricate building pieces, and work and witness teams come from everywhere to put these things together and build buildings in different places. This is the work and witness coordinating point for Guatemala, and really for that whole part of the Mesoamerican region there. It's a big deal. And I'm like, all these years we just it's kind of on the other side of the city from where we live, so, or where we go to stay when we go to Guatemala. But it's pretty significant. So it's a theological seminary. They train pastors and give them degrees and so forth. Great educational center. When we were there, we actually met with the director and a couple of professors, and they were explaining to us how they wanted to convert some of their classes to more remote type of things, where the pastors didn't have to have the expense of traveling in to the city to take classes. Now the internet is, as internet is being, more ubiquitous, and even in the different little towns, in the little pueblos, if you have an internet connection, then you can be part of a class. So, one of these days, when things settle down, maybe I want to go back and I gave them my card and told them that we'd like to plug in wherever they need us. One of the things they also do here at this campus is translate letters from sponsors, like American sponsors, for Guatemalan children. So they'll translate, from the sponsors from English into Spanish, and then going back the other way, and all of that for that region goes through that campus as well. So they do a lot of work there. All right, what do we got next? Oh, yes. Recognize that guy? Yes. Guess where he's from? Guatemala. Absolutely. So in 2013, he was elected the 41st General Superintendent, Church in the Nazarene. He actually came to our church in Hollywood when we were in South Florida District. He came to our church when he was still the Eurasia Regional Director, and he gave his presentation and so forth, and he and his wife Judy and our family took them out to barbecue, but they had the Guatemalan connection, so that was really nice. But of course, when we see him go up the ranks, hey, we knew that guy. Yes, he spoke at one of the district assemblies. Yeah, yep. And I think that was after he became the general. Yeah, because it was the general that comes to do those things. Yes, yeah, and that was him. He's I mean, not like we know him very well, but from what we did get to know him, he's just a fantastic person. Very eloquent, very smart. So we're lucky to have him there, and he's a representative of Guatemala. He's a product of Guatemala. He was born there. He was ordained there. So he's a significant contribution for the Nazarene Church from Guatemala. All right, what else? Okay, so here's some statistics, and I don't know if those of you in the back can read them, but over here we have the Church of the Nazarene in Guatemala has just under 100,000 members. And again, this comes from the latest newsletter that was just emailed out to the NMI presidents. So just under 100,000 members, 738 fully organized churches, and 104 not yet fully organized. Just to put this in perspective a little bit, you know how many churches are on the Florida district? It's 122. The last I checked last night, 122 on the Florida district, and then the southern Florida district had like 90 something when we left, right? Okay, so around 200 in the state of Florida, which has a much bigger population than Guatemala, right? So we have 200 churches. They have 738 fully organized churches. So that's a pretty nice footprint, Nazarene footprint in a country. Yeah, praise the Lord, right? I mean, we've been to places. I've been to places where no Christian church can set up shop. I mean, Saudi Arabia, places like that, China, so to have this much influence, if you have a church that per capita, Guatemala probably has more Nazarenes in it than most areas of the world, and that's so great for cultural influence, for influencing. They have brought a lot of the gang members, out of the gang situation. Yeah, absolutely. As Salvadorans as well. When we were in El Salvador, there's a huge work in that, in getting people out of those violent gangs. So we have 375 district licensed and 428 ordained ministers, and that's quite a few as well. 16 missionaries serving in Guatemala, okay? And a lot of those missionaries aren't like, starting new works missionaries. They're there more as a coordination, because when you have this many ordained ministers in the country, it kind of runs itself. In El Salvador, there aren't any missionaries in El Salvador. Yeah. They basically work themselves out of a job, But places like El Salvador and Guatemala, they actually send missionaries from that country. Isn't that nice? Yeah. So, again, Nazarene Church has been there for a long time, as old as the Nazarene Church, and a little bit older, a little bit longer. But, it's a thriving church there. The church, the district in Alta Verapaz, I heard is the second biggest Nazarene district, population-wise, behind South Korea. I think there's a district in South Korea that's bigger, but Guatemala, that area of Guatemala is very populated with Nazarenes. It's got a bunch of them. Let's see. Okay. So one of the churches that were highlighted in this newsletter that we just received is this church called Camino de Santidad, which is the Way of Holiness. Mi Casa, you've heard of Mi Casa, Su Casa? Okay, so my house. So that's the name of the church. One of the things that this church did is they reopened before others did, and before other churches in the Nazarene Church and other denominations, other businesses. A lot of things were locked down in Guatemala during the COVID crisis. They reopened sooner than most. They had to, it was a little bit of a worry point for the leadership to do that, but they stepped out on faith and said, you know what, we're not gonna be locked up forever. We're gonna keep going. And they kept evangelizing, and the 27 people that you see there being baptized were reached during the COVID crisis. In spite of all the lockdowns and everything else, they still grew during that period. And then they noted that 250 adults from this church and children, 250 adults and children attended this Mount Zion, they spell it with an S, Mount Zion camp on just this April 27th. You may think that's a little strange. We usually send kids to camp, right? Teen camp, children's camp. Well, in these countries, the camp is really for the whole family. And we had the privilege of attending one in El Salvador, which was really nice. And at some other point, we could tell you stories about the bees, because the camp was right next to a farm, and the farm had a bunch of bees, to pollinate. They kept bees. And anyway, that became an issue, and we became like the Red Cross. As soon as one of those kids threw a rocket at one of these beehives, they just went crazy. But anyway, down there, everybody, the whole family goes to camp. So they're all camping. We all had tents, and the whole family kind of spent this time together. We still had devotionals. We still had everything that camp does. I think the kids had a contest on Bible memorization and things like that. It was just really neat to see all of that. But everybody, all members of the family. There was a particular member that was highlighted from this church. His name is Freddie Velasquez. He's a young man who was discipled through youth video calls. So they had apparently a program where they would have like youth video meetings. And he's actually one of the ones that are baptized in that picture. So here's what he said. He said, "I'm 24 years old. I suffer from a disability that limits my movements and makes it difficult for me to speak. I had distanced myself from God due to family circumstances that affected me so much that they managed to cool my spirit. I fell into a deep depression and I came to have very dark thoughts. I told a friend about it and she invited me to the video calls. At first I didn't give it much importance, but then God began to give me answers through the teachings, and he made me free from depression. Also, for several years, I had a battle with a very strong sin, and I remember that one day in a teaching about Jonah, God made me free from that sin. I confronted God about my disability, and I asked why he allowed it, but today I understand that I am a reflection of God's love. I have a smile that proves it. God loves you and has a purpose with every circumstance that he allows you to go through, but you must allow him into your life and let him act. God restored a broken heart in my whole being through my leaders. Today I thank God for Mi Casa, the church, since they accepted me without knowing me and they love me. On March 27th, I made the decision to be baptized together with my mother and sister, and now my desire is to serve God." And that just happened just a couple of months ago, right? So that's really nice. So you may be asking yourself, what are some of the things that we can? Whoa. All right. That looks weird. I don't know how that happened. But anyway, I have the prayer needs that I can just read to you. How about that? So one of the things that they ask for prayer for is for the visa processes for the delegates being sent from each district to the 2023 General Assembly and Convention. So we have General Assembly coming up. One of the biggest obstacles to bringing people to our General Assembly is getting them American visas. Sometimes we don't think about that. We could just, drive to Indianapolis or wherever they're going to have it, right? Or Kansas City, wherever. But these guys from any other country, they have to apply for a visa, and they have to go through that whole visa process to be able just to come and attend a conference, a Christian conference. So they want prayer for that. If you can remember that, the visa process and coming to General Assembly. Also pray for the planting of new churches in cities where we do not have a presence, and the pastors who are planting them. So they're still planting churches. They're still organizing churches and planting churches. What we found out is the place where we have our house in Guatemala is a place called Mixco, Mixco. It's just outside of Guatemala City, basically, a little bit higher, so you can, it has a nice view and everything. It's kind of an older style little town, but it doesn't have a Nazarene church. And I thought that was kind of interesting because I think Mixco, if I'm not mistaken, Judy, Mixco is like the second largest municipal area. So Guatemala City, and then you have Mixco. And but there's no Nazarene church there. In fact, the city, I think, only has maybe 3 Nazarene churches in the whole Guatemala City. Most of those 700 and something churches are out in the smaller areas and more dispersed populations of Guatemala. It's very interesting. So they want prayer for the new churches and church planning. Um, and then there's something that I've spoken about before, and that is child labor exploitation. Okay, so I mentioned there's an app that you can download, and you can get by country. It's called Sweat and Toil. Sweat and Toil, and it's an app that you can just download, and it'll tell you this is produced by a Department of State. So it's not Nazarene Church, but it tracks how many children in each country are being exploited through labor, and what kind of products that they're that they're being exploited for, so you can make informed decisions if you want to, buy or not buy certain products from these countries. But in Guatemala, according to their statistics, 6.5% of all children in Guatemala from 7 to 14 years old, 6.5% or 203,000 are working from 7 to 14. So yeah, 6.5% of all the children in Guatemala are working children. The other problem that I've kind of inserted in here and I've talked about before is the children that are coming across our southern border and being trafficked. Huge problem. I went on to the Customs and Border Patrol website last night and took a look at the statistics. And they have a very nice database where you can get on there and you can filter by country, you can filter by age group kind of thing, and of course different months. And I can see that let's just look at May of 2020. May of 2020, 47 children, Guatemalan children, because I filtered by Guatemalan. 47 Guatemalan children crossed illegally into the United States and were, captured and recorded in their database. 47. May of this year, 5,522. That's a huge increase, obviously. And I look at the statistics, going back over the past, 18 months or so, and it's averaging about 5,000. Just Guatemalan children that are coming in, and we know what they're coming in for. I mean, the CPB, the Customs Border Patrol, I mean, they all know it. They thought it was a crisis way back when, and it's a huge problem. So I would add those two items to the prayer list when you're thinking about Guatemala, right? So we have the visa process, the planting of new churches, and basically the children that are being exploited for work and being trafficked into the United States. Yes. You talk to her. Okay, so for those online, there was a local Guatemalan girl. How old was she? 13? 13-year-old Guatemalan girl here in Tallahassee that was trafficked into the country and I guess she's in the process of being sent back. Okay. But yeah, this is real stuff, obviously. So a lot of great things happening in Guatemala. Church is doing great things, making great inroads, but obviously there's still a lot of work to do. If you afterwards, if you want to come up here and take a look at some of the Guatemalan paraphernalia here, I'll just point out a couple of things. This right here, it's a tiny one, but this is the national instrument of Guatemala. It's called a marimba. You may have heard of it. It's like a big wooden xylophone. Beautiful. It looks beautiful, but it sounds beautiful. And if you ask Judy, she'll tell you, one of my dream jobs is to be a marimba player. I don't care where it is. I don't care if it's in a restaurant or if it's in some embassy or in the airport. I want to play the marimba. But anyway, that's the national instrument of Guatemala. And you have some other things in here. A lot of the artisan, dolls and toys and things like that we've picked up over the years. Of course, for us, it's like, it's literally our second home. I mean, we go back to Guatemala. It's really nice to be there, and part of our mission field in Guatemala is Judy's family, and I think we're making inroads there. Trying to be the best example we can be and help them out as much as we can. Any questions about Guatemala? I'm from Tallahassee, Florida. I was born in TMH. Yes. And you said, well, how in the world did I end up in Guatemala? I was invited to Guatemala by a couple of students that I went to school with at Florida Tech in Melbourne. Florida Tech, it used to be called the Florida Institute of Technology, or some people called it the Foreign Institute of Technology, because we had 91 countries represented in that college. And a couple of them were Guatemalan. They invited me there. I went there for a month during the summer of 1988, and I fell in love with it for all the reasons we talked about. I just absolutely fell in love with it. And well, I guess I should just finish the story, huh? When I came back from that trip, I felt like I was missing something, like my camera. I always brought a camera with me and took pictures of everything. I was looking around, I was missing something. Nope, not missing anything. But I had that, I couldn't shake that feeling. So I took a leave of absence from college and from Army ROTC, which I was enrolled in. And I went back to Guatemala. And I started building, the uncle of one of the students that had invited me, I met him. He told me about a sailboat that he had bought. It was a wreck. He had, drug it up from the bottom of Rio Dulce that I mentioned. And he had some engineers working on it for a couple of years, and he was about to get rid of it. And I said, well, why don't you give me a shot? Because that was my expertise coming out of high school. My science fair project, my senior science fair project, was developing a sailboat